Okay, so in this video, we're actually going to discuss how to make SharePoint 2013 REST API calls in AngularJS. And if you've been following the series, you actually realize that this is a repeat of a previous video that was sent. Part of that is two reasons. One, I need that video end up being more than an hour long. So as promised, I try to keep these under 30 minutes. So I really want to get this rebroadcast or re-recorded and be very poignant with the topic at hand versus a lot of discussion and architecture discussion. I won't delete the other video. If you look under takeouts, so it'd be season 1, takeout 1, that's where you can get the full length of the video, but I think this is more poignant. And the second reason is that I actually get some feedback from Jeff. And Jeff, I really do appreciate that, where the recommendation was, hey, when you do the beginning of them, can you just do a quick slide with the cover, so that way we know what we're getting into before we invest the 30, 40 minutes to watch the video, which is fair, right? So we're going to cover these 6 things. So how to get SharePoint 2013 REST API in 6 easy steps. The first one is actually not a standard step. This is something that we need to do, is to clean up a homepage because we have a lot of text, test text out there. We also have some of the out-of-the-box web parts, so we're going to go ahead and clean that up. And then we're actually going to display the job categories component or job categories feature. And we want to, and I've already went out and created a SharePoint list to represent that data. And we're going to go out there and we're going to inspect the JSON so we understand how the call that we need to make. Most of this will be reviewed because it's all going to be out of the box at REST API, how to format that URL, and then how to, what the format of the JSON will look like that's being returned, and that's going to get us in step number 3. Step number 3, we're going to actually go in and start to rebuild or actually build out a reusable method within the services layer within Angular, and this can be true and reused for any SharePoint call to get list data or document data. The 4th step, we will build the business layer or the business method that actually go and get job categories. So if we do step number 3 correctly, what's going to happen is that this is going to, step 4 will be a very reusable pattern. It's going to call the method that we created in step 3. But as you look for, as you will see, anytime that we have to create new features or capabilities, we're just repeating this pattern here and just modifying the URL. So it's actually very, very a nice reusable slick pattern. I actually really enjoy and actually surprised on how easy it is once you get a great foundation in place. And to build new features and capabilities, I think you really just copy and paste and making a few modifications to get those features to work. The 5th one would be the component. So we'll build that out for the job categories, which is probably the most important part. That's the glue. The component, as we discussed before, is the one that gets called first. And then the component determines which backend services to call and which HTML template to load. And then that takes us to our last step. Our last step is actually, once we have the JSON, we'll go ahead and hydrate that HTML template for the job categories, and we'll walk through that. So in a high-level illustration, basically, we're going to work from the inside out. So we're going to take a look at the SharePoint 2013 JSON. We're going to build the methods here at the services layer, which is going to call and request that JSON via the REST API. Once we have that, the component will then call the services, the business method service that we're going to build for job categories, and then it's going to that's going to be almost like a pass-through. So we're going to tell it which list and to get, how many to get, and how to order, and all this other good stuff. And then the component would then just call that or pin that to the HTML template. All right, let's go ahead and take a look. Oh, I do want. Yeah, let's save this. All right, so let's bring up the web page. So the first thing we want to do is go ahead and clean this guy up. And I've went through, because this is a repeat video, I've already gone through in edit mode and removed all of the web parts, the out-of-the-box web parts that were here. This page title, I think that's coming from the page layout. So let's go ahead and remove that as well. So if we go into the home page layout, no, it's not there. Maybe that's in the header template. Yes. Let's go ahead and take this guy out and save that, and just go ahead and push that up. Okay, so and then also while we're here, let's where did we leave off in the previous video? So in the previous video, we had the blog post, right? And if you haven't done so already, go into your home page layout and remove that snippet that we had for the blog post. And what we're going to do, we're going to just drop that into a reusable, I'm sorry, the snippet, what's it called? Script editor. So if you're on the home page, let's go ahead and add a web part. Let's go ahead and add in the script editor web part. This is out of the box script editor. And let's go ahead and add the token in that's needed to represent the blocks. And one of the things I want to show you here, we're kind of getting a little bit off topic, but this is going to be a segue into what we need to build. If we go into the blog post component and grab the name of the component, and then in the script editor, we can just take that name and then represent that feature right here using the SharePoint out of the box web part. And we talked about how you have to use hyphens to get rid of the casing, because in Angular, one of the rules is that you can't have capital letters in the HTML tag name. So that's their naming convention on how to get rid of that. And what I want to do, let's just do save and keep editing, because we actually want to add in another web part. Okay, so this is the latest blog component. This is displaying. This is just standard HTML. We're going to walk through real quick and fix those images within the latest blog post. And now let's go ahead and create one for our job categories, which is the one we will hydrate using RestAPI. So if we go back into this guy, we do not have one for job categories. So let's go ahead and create that. And again, as I mentioned before, in JavaScript, copy and paste is your friend. Let's just call this guy job categories. And that's going to come through the job categories HTML template. Job, as we have it spelled here as it listed in the right. Okay, everything else remains the same. Okay, and we save this off. Let's go ahead and push up the components. That's the guy that we just modified. And now let's create a web part that represents the job categories. Script editor, get this added. Again, I just copied the component name, so that way I don't create a typo. I can just use this as a model. And then the closing tag. You know what, let's try the self-closing tag and see if that works. Insert here. Actually, self-closing is a lot easier to work with than having to do the closing tag. Did it work? No, didn't work. Okay, closing tag, fine. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I haven't figured out which scenario I need to be in for this to work correctly. But I definitely used it before where it was self-closing tag and everything rendered as expected. Okay, so now we should have our job categories. How do we do? No. Okay, let's see. Is there an error? Okay, I typed something incorrectly. Job categories. Oh, you forgot the S. Maybe the self-closing tag did work. Well, you can go check that out and confirm. I had the reference to the HTML file incorrect. All right, so now if we, there we go. what's this one? Block that. Oh, okay, that's a JPEG. Okay, so let's we'll fix these towards the end if we have time. Right now, let's go ahead and get into the meat of the job categories. So basically, these are all the hard-coded categories that we have. I've went through and created a, let's just pop this open in another tab so we can bounce between them. I created a SharePoint list to represent the job categories data. And basically just call this guy job categories, and then I load it in with the exact same data that we have in the HTML. So we have the title, this category icon here, this is the font awesome class, right? And then we have a display order, and here are just a choice field. So if you look at this guy, it's very straightforward. So I'm using the out of the box title field. I created a category field, which is just a drop down a choice field that has a drop down of different category icons. And then I did another drop down that has a display order number 1 through 20. If you look at the takeout video, again, that's going to be season 1, takeout 1. I go into great explanation and detail on why I chose to use the column types that I used. And then also some of the gotchas and pitfalls, especially when working in 2013, things that you should be aware of. So what I'm going to do, let's just call this Deshaun Cat. Just give it the money icon, and then we'll just make this a display order too. Since we was here, might as well just add some data. But basically, this is it. Now, if we want to take a look at this JSON that we're going to take a look, call in, I'm actually using, what you want to do is pop in any REST client. I'm actually using Yark, which is yet another REST API client. And these are very helpful and useful because, one, it makes sure that you're making your REST API calls correctly. You can confirm the JSON that you're getting so you understand what to expect. If there's any issue or need troubleshooting, these tools are very good at being able to look at the JSON without having to wire up the code in order to make that happen. So the REST API call to get that data is just going to be underscore API web list, get list by title. And then what you want to do is just specify the list name. In our case, it's job categories. And then we want all of the items. So that's going to be our get method. In the custom header, I actually have one saved off here. We're going to use the application JSON OData verbose. So let's go ahead and get that added, and then we're going to request the data. So we have a 404. Usually a 404 means that I fat finger something and something that is not spelled correctly. Get list by title. I think it's just get by title. I also spelled list wrong. There's 2 T's in there. I'm spelling everything wrong. Let's try now. Okay, so that's better. So this is going to be the JSON that's returned. Now, this is going to be noisy because it's bringing in all the metadata. Unfortunately, if you were doing this in 2016, there has been an update to the REST API to where you can do no metadata, which makes this very, very clean, lightens the payload a little bit, makes it a little bit more efficient. But for 2013, it doesn't seem like that switch is working, or I don't have the latest communicative updates to make that switch work. So we're just going to work with the verbose OData for now. The only thing that you want to take a look at, a couple of things you want to take a look at actually. This is going to be the name of our fields that we need to bring in. So you see the outbox title, you see the one for the icons, and so all those the site columns that we actually want to leverage. And then the other thing that we want to note is that when we bring up our reusable methods within the services layer, just the format or the structure of the JSON, like how many, where's the property for the actual object, and you kind of have to go a little bit deep here before you actually get the array of data that you're expecting. So we'll talk about, how to deal with that, okay? So we're going to reference this on and off. So let's go ahead back into our project, and let's go to the services layer. And here in the services layer, as we talked about before, we have the services call, and above the return object is everything that's private. Anything embedded in the return object is what we consider public. So what we want to do, let's go ahead and create a config file. and this is more of a Angular thing. So for the get method, obviously there's get, post, put, and delete. We're only going 90% of our function calls, or 85% of our function calls will be gets. So what we want to do is set up a reusable config for that for SharePoint. So SharePoint actually expects in the header. So this is an object here. We just call it headers. And we're going to set this property to the accept header. Application JSON OData equals verbose. Now this is what and this should mimic what we have here in the plugin application / JSON OData verbose, and that's accept, right? Okay, so that's our config file. So anytime we make an HTTP module get request, we have to pass in this config as a parameter. And that guy we can actually make reuse as well. So let's do a private function. Let's call this get SP items. And this could be both for, excuse me for a second. Sorry about that. So this could be both for list data and document library data or files in the document library. So we want to set get SP list data, get SP items. Sorry, I still got something stuck in my throat. So we're going to return the promise for the HTTP get, and this is going to take in a URL. Let's just call this the endpoint, and we actually should pass this in. So this, again, a reusable function that the caller, the business method, can be able to call back in to call in the URL, and then we will automatically set the get config, which needs to be passed on each and every get request within the HTTP module, or it defaults to, I think it, I don't know if we do not pass it, it doesn't specify a accept header. And I think what the REST API is going to do is just default to XML. So to ensure JSON, this is, so we definitely want to call this config here. Then we have the then method, which is going to call our anonymous function. And this is just going to, our anonymous function, and the parameter for this is going to be D. That's going to actually hold the JSON. And then we'll return d.data.d.results. Now, where did I get all this from? So the D is actually representing the parameter that we just passed in. The data represents the actual JSON object as a whole, the top node. So if you look at our JSON again, so the data represents this guy here, this object here. And then within this object, we have to go to the D property, and within that object, we have to go to the results property. And then there, we should get our array of objects. So that's how you kind of march down that piece. This always gets me hung up, and I'm sure that, after playing around with this a couple of times, that will get you hung up as well. But, that's, just keep playing around with it. Use your consoles to figure out what you're getting, what you're missing. And then you would kind of be able to get that call correct eventually, just toying around with it. The good news is that for every SP list item, for JSON for a list and JSON for a document, this format should remain true. And again, this is SharePoint 2013. For SharePoint 2016, the format's a little bit different. So you'll be able to inspect that and figure that piece out. SharePoint Online, it may be different as well, but I think it may match 2016. That may be the good news. Okay, so now we have this guy here. Let's go ahead and build our business method, the one that we will expose. So we just call this get job categories. And that's going to be a function. No parameters are going to be required for now. And our service, our endpoint URL is going to be, we want to start that with the site URL, which is this guy here. I'm surprised I'm not getting IntelliSense for that one. Okay, so site URL, And then let's just go up here and copy and paste our request. This guy here without the domain. And that's our request. Now we don't need this leading slash because our site URL is actually going to have a slash within it. So that way we don't need that guy. And this is dynamic, so per site collection, this is going to go ahead and pull that out. We talked about that before when we wired up our templates. And basically now, so we need to return the results of our private method, which is to get SP items. It is expecting an endpoint to be passed in, so let's pass in that URL. That's going to be fully qualified. Again, that's going to return a promise, so we need this special notation here. The data that it returns, we're going to represent that in D, and we're just going to return D. Now, the good news, because we went through and determined the right starting point for our JSON objects that we're interested in, this is going to do all the hard work for us. So we just, whatever it inspects or wherever our starting point is going to be, we're just going to return it there and using the D parameter, okay? All right, so that's actually it for the services layer. So now let's go ahead into our component. And then in our component, we just wanted to have all that JSON and we're just going to make this variable out. I'm going to call it items. And we're just going to tell for the services. Now, I want to make the call. It's tempting to make a call very similar to this, but this get template URL is not dealing with a promise, right? And what promises is a hydrated, it's a shell of an object, right? But it's empty. It doesn't represent any data. It's almost like a placeholder. So it's going to send us this placeholder, but we need the actual data once it gets hydrated. So because we're dealing with a promise, our syntax needs to be a little bit different. So we need to do services.get job categories. And I don't know why I'm trying to type this out. And the then operator, because it is a promise, anonymous function, and then just return. Now we can set our items equal to the return data. Now we've been using D all along, but just to show you that you don't have to use D, that you can actually specify any name that you want to represent the data. We're just going to go with F. No, let's just C for categories. All right, so that's going to be that guy. So now if we've done this correctly, we're going to make our get job categories call that public method, our business layer method. In here, let me just wait for a second. In here, we're going to get, it's going to make the service call, right, to this guy here. We're not passing any parameters. In this, because it is the business layer, it knows the name of the list to go after, and if we wanted any other filtering categories, or if we want to specify column names and all this other good stuff, we would do all that here in the business layer. Our component is not responsible for that. Our component is only responsible if this separation of concerns. It's only responsible for, okay, for this component, I need to call this business layer, load up this template, and then send this array to the template itself. Again, it doesn't know how the template is going to use that data, and it doesn't know how the service is called, which list and all this other stuff it needs to call in order to get that data. So all that, so the separation of responsibility is key. And I think if we continue to follow this pattern, when it goes to maintenance or updates and all this other good stuff, the changes become very centralized and minimized. And that way we don't have to go and touch many areas of the code. Okay, so now let's go into our job categories. We're making a lot of changes. Let's just push these up and just make sure we're not getting any errors. I always like to do these, especially in JavaScript, I like to do these spot checks along the way because things can get very hairy if you start to layer on many changes. Then you get an error and you have no idea which layer you were in that caused the error. Okay, so we're still getting our 404 for our missing icons here, which is fine. Nothing earth-shattering. Seems like our syntax and all that stuff is still holding true, which is good. All right, so let's go ahead and start spitting some of this data out. So if you go into job categories, and I am going to learn from the mistake I made in the previous video to where I know where to start repeating this HTML. So if you look at this, let's just look at one of these guys. All these guys are just repeating this block here. So using the bootstrap is really just create a new column for each one of those categories, and it has a container, it has a URL link for it, and all this other good stuff. So this is going to be our repeatable block. So what we want to do now, let's just use this first guy as our guinea pig. And the syntax for Angular to repeat the JSON is ng-repeat, very similar to a for each loop. And for every item in vm.items, right? And this VM again is an alias for the controller, and then items is the guy that we made up. So now we're just going to go through each one of those arrays of objects and look at each one of those and just spit out its data. And we do that in the sense of the templating notation with the double curly bracket token dot title. And I know this is dot title because, again, if you inspect your JSON for each item, you are clear on all the fields that are available to you. So this is our title, this is our font awesome icon name, and this is going to be our actually sort order. So we should be able to spit out the title, and then the icon name is for font awesome is going to be this guy here. So we just do item dot, oops, what was it, JP icon? JP icons. I don't know why I put an S on that. All right, so item.jp icons, and then we have the title, and we should be, if we're all wired up correctly, we should be able to see the JSON being displayed. Let's see here. Hit refresh. No errors. And we have double of what we started with. So because of where our HTML is situated, this guy is here at the top. All that's the dynamic JSON. Then when it starts to repeat itself, that's all the hard-coded stuff. So let's go ahead and get rid of all the hard-coded stuff. Push this template out again. Hit refresh. All right, so now we're good to go. And there's the Sean Katz that was just added. All right, so the one thing that we're missing, let's just look at this side by side, is that if we sort by display order, we should have banking sales, Deshaun Katz, blah, blah, blah. And if we look at this, these are actually out of order, right? So we got Deshaun Katz at the end. So in order to do that, what we want to do, we want to sort by that display order column, which is our custom column that we created. And I want to go in here and grab the right name for that. And then go into our services layer. Again, because the object, the business layer is the business method is the one that will control how things ordered and which list and all this other good stuff. So to control this ordering is very simple. We're going to use the OData notation. And if you're not familiar with OData, just do a Google search and come up to speed with the different syntax. But it's very similar to like a SQL query, to where you have special, or even link, right? You have special calls to where you can order, filter, select different columns. So I have all those columns. If we only wanted the title and icons and all that stuff, there's a select OData keyword method that you can leverage. And the good news is that you don't have to go in and start to create different services just to represent different segments of that data. You can use OData to do that. So what we want to do is pass in the query string parameter, and it's $order by, and then you just specify the column name that you want to order by. Now, you can also do descending, and that's the syntax if you want it in reverse order. Or you can leave it blank and it would default to ascending order. So let's go ahead and push this out and see if we can get this thing to order now. So hit refresh. There we go, Deshaun Katz are there. So if I go here and start playing around with the ordering, let's make Deshaun Katz number 1. And let's make banking number 19, second from the last. Okay. And now if I hit refresh, my ordering is kicking in, and banking is second from the last. Deshaun Katz is first. Okay. All right. So that's the ordering piece. The last one I want to do is to show you how to pass in different parameters into these web parts, right? So within these components. So ideally, if we were dealing with a standard web part, we should be able to come in here and adjust the web part properties to do other filtering or manipulation that we want to do to this guy. Because we're using the snip script editor, we don't, obviously our custom web part properties will not be there, but we actually have an opportunity to replace that or replicate that using attributes on the actual tag. So one of the things I can do is I can come up here. Let's do an easy one first. Let's just set the title. So instead of browse jobs, let's just call this featured, key jobs, key Deshaun jobs. All right. And we're going to pass that in as a title. And what that's going to do, that's going to give us, just like web part properties, it gives you the flexibility to, for every instance of a web part, the flexibility of manipulating that, or having that instance to manipulate that instance of the web part without having to create one that displays the title this way, create another one that displays the title another way. That's just silly, right? So what we want to do, let's replace this browse jobs with the title that I passed in. Now, we're already wired for the title. If we go to the components, and that's going to be the parameter on the component itself, we already wired for the title because we passed in as a bindings, right, item within here. So if you go inside of the HTML, where it says job categories, and go up here to where it's hard coding the title, let's just pass that in dynamically. Again, use the alias to represent the controller, and then just title. It's really that simple. And go ahead and push this guy up. Hit refresh. So now we have, and there's key Deshaun jobs. Now you have dynamic attributes controlling the HTML of this, so where you get a lot of reuse out of this one component because you're exposing a lot of public properties or attributes. Another thing we can do is now, that's easy. Okay, so we can control the HTML, but we can also pass different parameters into our services. And this is, if you watch the extended video, you notice that things kind of fell apart when we tried to do this. So let's just create a guy, let's call it count. And basically, this is going to be the max count that we want to display. So if there are 100 categories in that SharePoint list, we only want the top 2 or 5 or whatever. But we want our content managers, the ones that are dropping these web parts on the page, to be able to control the count for that particular page. So, so we have the count attribute here. And now we need to introduce another key piece to our component. And that's going to be the special on init event. So on the init event, this is more like very similar to like a page load. This is a special function that once called during the life cycle of this component, this guy would get called first before it starts to hydrate services and make calls to the HTML template. So in this guy, we actually need to pass in our services call, and you have to do that. It has to be this on init if you want to use attribute values that are passed in by the user in order to manipulate or to have an impact on your services. So in order to do that, let's just do control count. Again, because I'm in the component, on the JavaScript part of the component, I represent the controller using this local variable that we already done with this. But if I'm in a template, I use the VM, which is the alias, which we define here to represent the component in the template. So that's why it's 2 different names to represent the same property, right? It really depends on where you are, the JavaScript or the HTML piece. Okay, so we're going to pass in the component. Let me do a control KD to format this. we're going to pass in the count into our services. And if we go to our services, now we need to say, hey, we're expecting the max count from our caller. And with that max count, again, leveraging OData, we're just going to do the query string parameter, the special OData method called top, and whatever count we get is what we're going to set. Okay, so now let's go through, let's push up our component, and let's push up our services. All right, so that's there, hit refresh, and we actually should probably get 0, right? And the reason why we're getting 0 because we passed in undefined. We didn't specify a count. So let's go and specify the count. Go edit snippet. And then this should just be count equals, and let's just bring back 3. Put it in quotes. Then do insert. Publish it up. And we should get 3. All right, so now we have 3. So this is responding to our user specified attribute. Now, the one thing that we didn't like, right, because what if they are just dropping that component in within the web part and they don't specify the count, right? Because they won't know that the count is an available option. I mean, you have to come up with like a cheat sheet or something like that. That's probably one of the downfalls of not being able to use web part properties and using the attributes capability to do that. Is you have to figure out another way how to communicate the options to the content manager. Okay, so say for example, okay, they don't realize that count is an option. Title maybe, especially if that becomes a pattern, they can expect that. So they don't understand that count is an option. So what we need to do in our services is say, okay, if count comes in undefined, so in JavaScript that's just if not count, max count, let's just set it to 4 or 8. Let's just set it to 8, and that should allow us to handle our default value. So let's just go ahead and push that guy up. Hit refresh. All right, so now our default value is kicking in, and if I come in as a content manager and say nope, 8 is too many, let's just do 1 row, and by specifying 4. And let's publish this out. All right, so that's that. Okay, and the final piece is really just cleanup. I mean, that's pretty much it for REST API. Again, a nice reusable pattern. As you will see when we start to, if we tackle blocks next, we'll do a lot of copy and paste, modify like 1 or 2 items, and then we have blocks, right? So it's I really like this pattern. It's clean separation from the HTML and UI, the HTML and the JavaScript that's needed. And if you encapsulate a lot, you can get a lot of reusability out of it. So let's go through. Our last trick for today is to get rid of these blog icons, broken blog icons. And basically, if you look at the block template, it's looking, it just has a relative path to represent the images directory. So let's go ahead and make this a little bit more dynamic. So we're going to steal the same pattern that we use for making the templates dynamic. And we just want to say get images, which is like the root directory URL. Or you can call it images dir URL, okay? We're not going to pass anything in because those images, there's no need for them to pass in the images name. Really, they just need the starting point of that. So really, we could just remove this piece. It really becomes a URL at this point. Style library, where's the, let's see, where's the images library? So style library, job portal, not app, design. Oh, this is getting very, let's collapse, I'm sorry. Let me collapse this guy here. All right, so job portal, design. So style library, job portal, design, and images. And we're started off with a whack, right? And then the site URL, this is going to be the current site collection. All right, so images dir, let's just copy this, save it off, go to our component, and this is going to be in the job latest. Okay, so let's just set this guy. Again, I'm not dealing with a promise object. So let me just do images. So I can set this equal to the results of this services method call. And we're not passing any parameters. So get images dir, and we just set that guy there to the image URL. Let me save it, copy this, go to my template, and then just, because I'm using a token, I have to do the ng source, put my token in, double curly brace, and VM to represent the controller, and then we set it equal to this property. Right, and because this guy ends with a /, to avoid the double /, we're just going to remove that guy there. And anywhere we're using blog, actually, let's copy more than that. Let's copy this whole method call here. Because basically what they did, they just used a placeholder to represent the blog post image or feature image. So we're actually going to make that dynamic anyway. All right, so that should do it. Let's just publish this up. Wait, so we want to publish the template, the component, and the services. Go ahead and publish this up. All right, and if we get to the website, hit refresh. Oh, we missed one. Okay, well that's fine, because once we make this guy dynamic anyway, it's gonna pan itself out. All right, so that's that. So still over 30 minutes. We're working hard to get this time down, but I think it's a lot of information, and you definitely don't want to skip any steps in that piece of the process. But as you can see, just a recap, that we started off with our services, and we have a nice reusable set of methods here, right? Because when we get the SharePoint REST API data for any items in the list or document library as a collection, this guy can be reused. So now to stamp these out is just really just a matter of, like, if we wanted to say get latest blogs or get blogs, it's really just get blogs here, let them specify the max count. We can reuse a lot of this, and then just, we haven't done this, but say for example, if we called it blogs and ordered by modified, and then modified, is that spelled right? Yeah, modified, and then the top count, and we're done, right? And because these are properties, or functions on the object, you just have to separate them on the column, and then we're done, right? So obviously this is fake, and I have to confirm if that's the right name, and modify, and you probably want recent, right? So you have to do it in descending order. And that's it, right? So that's how you get the REST API for blocks. And then when you get to the next feature, you're going to copy and paste this guy and go off and do the same. So once you have a reusable pattern in place, the maintenance becomes super easy, the new development becomes super easy, and of course, the business logic becomes a little bit different. So you have to do some other manipulation and all this other good stuff on how to do that. So in the next video, we'll keep pressing on this model, and then we'll actually look into how do we bring in publishing images, which sounds interesting or sounds simple. It sounds like there should just be another property on a JSON object. It is in a way, but you have to do something special because they're publishing images. So there's a double call that you have to make, and things get a little bit interesting once we get into that. Okay, so that's it for this video. Again, thanks a lot, Jeff, for the tip on doing the agenda before these videos. I think that's going to be helpful for a lot of folks. Any other suggestions like that, you guys, please leave them in the comments. Any questions or concerns, clarity that's needed, please leave them in the comments. Take care.